The sun was setting behind the tall, rugged hills that surrounded the small town of Meadow Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty roads and vast fields. In the distance, a lone figure could be seen walking slowly across the dirt path toward a simple old farmhouse. Clara had lived here for as long as she could remember, though the past few years had changed everything. Once the farmhouse was filled with laughter and joy. Clara and her husband Tom had built a life together here on the ranch. They had no children, but they had each other, and that was enough. The work was hard, but it was rewarding. Clara enjoyed every part of ranch life, from feeding the animals to tending to the crops. Tom was her best friend, and together they dreamed of a future where they would grow old side by side, watching the sun set over their land. But that dream came to a sudden and tragic end. Tom had been killed in a car accident on a stormy night. It happened so fast, and the world as Clara knew it shattered in an instant. She couldn't remember the exact details of the night Tom died. All she knew was that when she got the phone call, her heart stopped. Tom was gone. The ranch felt cold and empty without him. In the months that followed, Clara struggled to find meaning in her days. She spent most of her time working on the farm, doing her best to keep things running as they had when Tom was alive. But everything felt different. The house was too quiet. The days were too long. No matter how much she worked, there was always a part of her that felt like something was missing. Clara's friends and family tried to comfort her, but she couldn't bring herself to talk to them. They didn't understand what it felt like to lose someone so close, someone who had been her everything. Her heart ached, and no amount of work seemed to fill the emptiness that consumed her. Across town, another life was also changing in ways no one could have imagined. James was a rancher, much like Clara's late husband, but his situation was different. James had been married to Sarah, and together they had 2 young children, Lily, a curious 6-year-old, and Ben, an energetic 4-year-old. Like Clara, James had once thought his life was perfect. He and Sarah had worked hard to build their ranch, and he had dreamed of watching his children grow up on the land they loved. But Sarah's sudden death from a severe illness had turned James's world upside down. She had been sick for only a short time, and the doctors couldn't save her. The kids were too young to fully understand what had happened, but James knew the pain of losing his wife would never go away. He found himself completely unprepared for the role of a single father. The loss of Sarah had left him feeling lost and overwhelmed, unsure of how to balance the demands of the ranch and raising his children. The days after Sarah's passing were some of the hardest James had ever faced. He tried to keep the ranch going, but it was difficult. He had always relied on Sarah to handle much of the household and the children's care. Now, with both his wife and his old routine gone, James felt as though he was drowning in responsibilities he couldn't handle alone. His children, Lily and Ben, missed their mother terribly. Lily would often cry at night, clutching her mother's old sweater, and Ben would wander around the house calling out for her. James knew he needed help, but he didn't know where to turn. His family lived far away, and he didn't have many friends in town who could offer the kind of support he needed. One afternoon, as James sat in his worn-out rocking chair on the porch, trying to think of a way to make things work, he heard a knock at the door. It was a sound he wasn't used to hearing, and he hesitated before getting up to answer it. When he opened the door, he found Clara standing there, holding a basket of freshly baked bread. She had heard about Sarah's passing and had come to offer her condolences. James invited her in, and the two sat down to talk. Clara shared her own grief, speaking softly about the loss of her husband, and James opened up about the struggles he faced as a single father. Clara had always known James from a distance. She had seen him around town working his ranch, but they had never really spoken. However, something about the conversation felt different. It wasn't just small talk. It was raw and real, 2 people connecting over shared pain. Clara could see the exhaustion in James's eyes, and she could hear the sadness in his voice. He was a man who had been knocked down by life and was struggling to find a way back up. The 2 talked for hours that day. Clara found herself wanting to help, to do something for James and his children. She offered to help around the ranch to look after Lily and Ben while James worked. She had no experience with children, but she knew how to cook, clean, and keep the house running. Maybe she couldn't bring Tom back, but perhaps she could offer some small comfort to a family that was also hurting. James hesitated at first. He wasn't used to asking for help, especially from someone he barely knew. But Clara's kindness was undeniable. She wasn't asking for anything in return, only to help. She understood grief, and she understood how difficult it could be to keep going when everything seemed so overwhelming. Finally, James agreed. It wasn't an easy decision, but he knew he needed help. He had to focus on the ranch, and the kids needed someone to care for them. Maybe Clara could offer them the support they so desperately needed. "I appreciate it, Clara," James said quietly. "I really do. But I have to warn you, this isn't easy work. The kids they miss their mom, and I'm struggling to be what they need." Clara nodded, a gentle smile on her face. "I understand. I'm not trying to replace anyone, but I can help. I'll stay as long as you need me." And so Clara began to spend more time with James and his children. The quiet, lonely farmhouse that had once been filled with grief slowly began to feel like a home again, filled with the warmth of someone who cared. For the first time since Tom's death, Clara felt a spark of purpose. And for James, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one he never expected, but one that might just bring him the hope he'd been searching for. The road ahead was uncertain, but both Clara and James knew they had to keep moving forward. Together they would navigate their grief, their losses, and the challenges of rebuilding their lives. And in that journey they would discover the strength they never knew they had. Days grew longer as Clara settled into her new role on the ranch. At first it was awkward for everyone. Clara, used to living a quiet, solitary life, now found herself surrounded by the chaos of 2 young children and the demands of a working ranch. Lily and Ben, though still grieving the loss of their mother, were beginning to warm to Clara's presence. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah, but rather to fill a gap that no one else could. James watched as Clara worked alongside him, helping with the children, the house, and the ranch. She had never asked for much in return, only offering her help with a genuine smile. It was the first time in months that he felt like he could breathe again. There was something comforting in her steady presence, something that made the long hours of work more bearable and the quiet nights less lonely. Yet, despite the quiet companionship between them, James knew that this arrangement could not continue forever. Clara had a life of her own, and surely she had her own plans. He didn't want to take advantage of her kindness. But at the same time, he was more than grateful for the help. Raising 2 young children alone was harder than he could have imagined, and Clara had become a lifeline he hadn't expected. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, James and Clara sat on the porch after a long day. The cool evening air wrapped around them, and for a brief moment it felt like time had stopped. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the distance. It was one of those rare moments where the world seemed peaceful, where the weight of the past could be set aside for a while. Clara turned to James, a serious look on her face. "James," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking." James looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "What about?" Clara hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "You've been through so much," she said finally. "And I've been here for a while now, helping with the kids and the ranch. And I can see how much you're struggling. I know you're doing your best, but it's a lot. And I'm wondering, well, if there's something I can do to help, something more permanent." James looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked, not entirely sure what Clara was getting at. Clara took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is this: I can stay. I can help with the kids. I'll raise them, make sure they have the care they need. I know it's not the same as what Sarah would have done, but I promise you, I'll do my best. And in return, I'd like to stay here, be part of this family. I know it's a lot to ask, but it's what I'm offering." For a moment, the world seemed to stop moving. James stared at her, his mind racing. Clara's words hung in the air between them, like a weight that neither of them could lift. She had been so kind, so generous with her time and care. He hadn't expected anything like this. He had never once thought that Clara might want to stay, that she might want to become more involved in their lives. James wasn't sure what to say. He had never been good at asking for help, and the idea of someone else stepping into his late wife's role was difficult to imagine. But Clara wasn't asking to replace Sarah. She was offering a solution, a way forward. And maybe that was what they both needed, a way forward. Clara continued, her voice quieter now. "I don't expect anything from you, James. I just want to help. The kids need someone, and you need someone too. I can be that person. James swallowed hard. He knew Clara was right. Raising Lily and Ben on his own was harder than he had imagined. He had tried, but there were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. And Clara, she was already so much of a presence in their lives. She had a way with the kids, a gentleness that they needed. Lily and Ben had grown attached to her already, and even James had started to rely on her in ways he hadn't expected. But it was still a big decision. A decision that would change everything. Clara, James started, but then he stopped himself. He had been a man of few words most of his life, and now, faced with this unexpected offer, he wasn't sure how to respond. Clara gave him a reassuring smile. You don't have to make a decision right away. Take your time. I just wanted you to know that I'm here for you. I want to help. For the next few days, James found himself lost in thought. The ranch was as busy as ever, but his mind wasn't on the work. It was on Clara's offer. He had never been one to rely on anyone, much less a woman who wasn't family. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on handling things on his own. But now, with the kids and the ranch and the weight of everything on his shoulders, he realized he couldn't keep going like this. The nights were the hardest. After a long day, James would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. He missed Sarah more than words could express. But Clara was different. She wasn't a replacement for Sarah, but she had a way of bringing a sense of calm and stability to their lives. She had stepped into their world without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. She had been there when they needed her most. Finally, one evening, as the sun was setting once again, James found Clara on the porch, looking out over the land. The wind was gentle, the air cool. It was the perfect moment for a decision. He walked up to her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Clara, he said, his voice rough, I've been thinking about what you said, and I've come to a decision. Clara turned to him, her face soft with curiosity. I can't do this alone anymore, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I need you. I need you to stay, and I need you to help raise the kids. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise that I'll try, and I'll be grateful every day that you're here. Clara's eyes filled with emotion as she reached out and took his hand. I'll stay, she said softly. I'll stay and I'll help. I'll raise your children. I promise. In that moment, both of them knew that their lives had changed forever. The journey ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together. And that was enough for now. Part 3. Building a family. The days turned into weeks, and Clara's presence in the house became more of a constant than James had ever expected. When she first arrived, it was as though she was a temporary fixture, a kind woman helping out until her own life called her away. But as time went on, it became clear that Clara wasn't just here to help. She was here to stay, and in many ways she was already becoming a part of the fabric of their lives. At first, the adjustment was difficult. James had never been good at sharing control. He had run the ranch his whole life, and even after the loss of Sarah, he had maintained a strict routine. But Clara was patient. She wasn't trying to take over. She wasn't trying to push him aside. She simply found her place, gently filling the spaces that Sarah had once occupied. And as the days passed, James realized that Clara was no longer just helping him. She was becoming a partner in every sense of the word. The mornings were always busy on the ranch. James would wake up early to start his chores, but now Clara would be there by his side, tending to the children, making breakfast, and helping him with the small tasks that added up over the course of the day. Lily, who had been quiet and withdrawn since her mother's passing, started to smile more. She would follow Clara around the house, chatting with her as if they had always known each other. Ben, too, began to warm up to Clara, calling her mom in his innocent 4-year-old way. James watched the transformation with a sense of awe. He had never expected this. In a way, Clara had already begun to heal his family even before he realized it. She was there for the children, for him in ways he hadn't known he needed. The silence that had once filled their home was slowly replaced with laughter and conversations. The air no longer felt heavy with grief, though it would never truly disappear. Clara had given them something they had lost: hope. One afternoon, while James was working on the far end of the ranch, Clara took the children out to the small garden behind the house. It had once been Sarah's favorite spot, and although it had become overgrown since her passing, Clara had decided to bring it back to life. She was pulling weeds and showing Lily how to plant flowers, while Ben, true to his nature, was running around, collecting sticks and pretending they were swords. Lily watched Clara intently as she worked, her small hands gently placing seeds into the earth. "Do you think the flowers will grow back, Clara?" Lily asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Clara smiled warmly at her. "Of course, Lily, flowers are like people. They need care, love, and time to grow, but they always find a way to bloom again." Lily looked down at the dirt in her hands and then back up at Clara. "I think I want to help them grow too." "You already are," Clara said, her voice full of affection. "The most important thing is that you believe they can, just like you believe in yourself." For the first time since Sarah's death, Lily smiled, a real smile that lit up her face. It wasn't a smile of sadness or fear. It was the smile of a little girl who was beginning to believe that life could be good again. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, James noticed a change in the atmosphere. The house felt warmer, fuller, alive in a way it hadn't been in so long. The kids were chatting with Clara about the garden, and even James found himself laughing, sharing stories with Clara about his own childhood and how he had learned to work on the ranch. The more time Clara spent with them, the more the family began to feel like one. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah, but she had found her own place in their hearts. James could see that the children were thriving under her care, and that gave him a sense of peace he hadn't known in months. The deep sorrow that had once clouded his heart was beginning to lift, and he realized that Clara had helped him more than he could ever express. Yet despite all the progress, there were still moments when the weight of grief would come crashing back down. Clara had never expected to be in this situation. She had never imagined herself stepping into someone else's life, especially not in such a profound way. But as much as she tried to push aside her own doubts, she could not escape the thought that she was filling a role no one else could. One night, as Clara sat on the porch staring out at the stars, she felt a sense of loneliness creep in. She hadn't expected it, but there it was, tugging at her heart. The ranch, once a place of solace for her, now felt heavy with memories. She missed Tom more than she could express. She had thought that helping James and his children would fill the void left by his death, but she realized that it was a different kind of void, one that would never be filled. James, noticing her stillness, stepped out onto the porch and sat beside her. They were both silent for a moment, the sound of crickets filling the air around them. "You okay?" James asked, his voice low, knowing that Clara had been quiet for a while. Clara nodded, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "Yeah, I'm fine, just thinking." "I understand," James said, looking up at the stars. "It's hard, isn't it? Losing someone you love." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her own loss. "I thought I could escape it by helping you and the kids. But sometimes it feels like there's no escaping the past." James looked at her, his expression soft but filled with understanding. "You don't have to escape it, Clara. It's okay to miss them. It's okay to feel sad sometimes, but you're not alone anymore. We're in this together." Clara turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had come to care for James in ways she hadn't expected. They had both lost so much, but now in each other's company there was a sense of healing. Slow but steady. "I'm glad I'm here," Clara said quietly. "I really am." And in that moment, James knew that their lives had become something new, something they hadn't expected but were beginning to accept. Their family was growing, not just in number but in strength, love, and resilience. They had each other, and that was enough to begin building something beautiful again. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamic within the house. The once empty and quiet home had transformed into a lively place, filled with the sounds of children's laughter, the smell of fresh meals, and the quiet hum of a family finding its rhythm again. Clara, who had come to the ranch with no intention of staying long, had now settled into a life she never imagined. And James, though still haunted by the loss of Sarah, had begun to find a new kind of peace, one that had been absent for far too long. The ranch was still as demanding as ever. James had never been one to shy away from hard work, but lately it had felt easier. With Clara by his side, managing the house, helping with the kids, and even pitching in on the ranch work, James found that he could breathe again. There was a sense of balance, a sense of partnership that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. It was a quiet, unspoken bond that had begun to develop between them. One evening, After a long day of work, Clara and James sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, the sky painted with shades of orange and purple. The children had gone to bed, exhausted from their day of play. It was one of those rare moments when the world seemed to slow down, when all the noise of life quieted, and there was just peace. Clara sighed softly, her hands wrapped around a mug of warm tea. "I never thought I'd end up here," she said, her voice carrying a hint of disbelief. "I never imagined myself living on a ranch, raising someone else's children." James turned to her, his eyes soft but searching. "I never thought I'd be here either," he said. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to take care of the kids, not after Sarah passed away." Clara nodded, understanding more than he realized. It wasn't just about the ranch or the children. It was about the weight of grief, about learning to live again when all you wanted to do was hide from the world. They had both lost so much, and yet, in each other's company, they had found something new, a sense of comfort, of shared strength. "I've been thinking," Clara continued, her eyes meeting James's. "We've both been through so much, we've carried so much grief, but we've carried it together, I think. I think that's how we're getting through it." James's heart swelled with emotion. He hadn't realized just how much Clara had become a part of his life until that moment. She wasn't just someone who helped with the kids or kept the house running. She had become someone he relied on, someone who had become a steady presence in his life. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Clara," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more for us than I could ever thank you for." Clara looked at him, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "I'm not trying to replace Sarah," she said quietly. I just want to help. I want to be here for you and for the kids. You all deserve to be happy again." James felt his heart skip a beat. There was something in her voice, something in the way she looked at him, that made him realize how much he had come to care for her. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It wasn't just about the help she had given him. It was something deeper, something that had been growing between them for months, something he hadn't fully understood until now. The silence between them grew, filled with unspoken words, with feelings neither of them could easily name. James looked down at his hands, unsure of how to express what he was feeling. But Clara, sensing his struggle, placed her hand gently on his. "You don't have to say anything, James," she whispered. "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the moment hung in the air, the world around them fading away. All they had was this quiet connection, this bond they had built together, despite the hardships they had faced. It was enough. As the days went by, their relationship slowly began to shift. There were still moments of hesitation, still moments where they both struggled with their feelings, but there was also something more. There were moments of tenderness, small gestures, quiet conversations, lingering touches that spoke of something deeper, something more than just two people sharing a house. It wasn't long before James realized he was falling in love with Clara. It wasn't something he had planned. It wasn't something he had expected. But it was undeniable. Clara had become an essential part of his life, in a way that went beyond friendship or simple companionship. She had healed a part of him he hadn't even known was broken, and in doing so, she had unknowingly become his anchor, his reason for hope. But Clara was different. She had her own fears, her own insecurities. She hadn't come to the ranch expecting to fall in love with anyone. She had come to help, to fill a role, to make sure the children had someone who cared for them. She had never intended for herself to become so entwined in James's life. But over time, she had. And now, she found herself wondering if what she was feeling for him was love, or if it was simply the closeness they had developed over the months of sharing their grief. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, James finally found the courage to speak what had been on his heart for weeks. He turned to Clara, his hands nervously clasped in front of him. "Clara," he began, his voice low, "I don't know what's happened between us, but I do know this. I care about you, more than I ever thought I would. And I think I'm falling in love with you." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at James, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment she didn't know what to say. The truth was she had been feeling the same way, but the fear of crossing a line, of complicating everything, had held her back. But now, as she looked into his eyes, all that fear seemed to fade away. "I care about you too, James," she said softly. "And I think I'm falling in love with you too." For a moment neither of them spoke. There was only the sound of their breaths, their hearts beating in unison. Then, without another word, James reached for her hand, and Clara took it, their fingers intertwining naturally as if they had always belonged together. In that simple gesture, everything changed. They weren't just two people living in the same house anymore. They were partners, in every sense of the word. Partners in grief, partners in life, and now, partners in love. The days after James and Clara confessed their feelings to each other were filled with a new sense of lightness. The air around the ranch seemed fresher, the sun brighter. What had once been a house full of grief and uncertainty was now becoming a home, a place of warmth, laughter, and shared joy. They were no longer just two people coexisting in a difficult situation. They were a family, reconstructed perhaps, but strong and whole in their own way. Clara continued to help James with the children and the ranch. Lily and Ben, still young and full of wonder, had accepted her as part of their lives. They had long since stopped thinking of her as a helper or visitor. To them, Clara was simply Mom, the woman who cared for them, listened to their worries, and always knew how to make them smile. Ben had a habit of running up to her every morning with a drawing he had made, his little hands holding the crumpled paper out to her with a proud smile. Lily, more reserved, found comfort in Clara's presence, confiding in her in a way she hadn't with anyone else. James watched all of this unfold with a sense of gratitude and wonder. His children were thriving, growing in ways he hadn't thought possible after the loss of Sarah. And Clara, she had become more than just the woman who stepped into their lives to help. She had become the person who breathed new life into their home. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt this peaceful, this content. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, James looked around the table. The children were laughing, their plates filled with food Clara had prepared. The sound of their chatter filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like years, James didn't feel a weight in his chest. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was good. It was real. Clara caught his eye across the table and gave him a small smile. He smiled back, his heart full. It was in moments like these that he realized just how much Clara had changed everything. She had brought joy back into their lives, and for that, he was eternally grateful. The following weekend, James decided it was time to take a step forward, one that would seal the new life they were building together. He had been thinking about it for days, knowing deep down that it was the right thing to do. He had no idea what the future would look like, but he knew that Clara was the woman he wanted by his side for the rest of his life. After the children went to bed one evening, Clara and James took a walk around the ranch. The sky was clear, the stars shining brightly above them. The air was cool and the silence of the night was comforting. They walked side by side, their hands brushing occasionally, but neither of them speaking. Finally, as they reached a quiet spot near the barn, James stopped. Clara turned to him, sensing the change in the air, the seriousness in his demeanor. "Clara," James said, his voice low but steady, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Clara looked up at him, her heart racing. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was to come. She had no idea what James was going to say, but she knew it was important. "What is it, James?" she asked, her voice soft, almost as if afraid to break the stillness. James took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I know we've both been through a lot, and I know we've built something here, something real, something worth fighting for." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And I want you to know that I want to keep building that with you. For the rest of my life." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She felt the warmth of his words seep into her chest, and she couldn't help but smile. She had never expected this moment, but now that it was here, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "James," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What are you saying?" James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. a silver band with a single small diamond. He took her hand in his and looked into her eyes, his own filled with sincerity. "Clara, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the weight of the question was almost too much to bear. "Will you be with me, with us forever?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined this moment, but now that it was here, she knew with all her heart that her answer was simple and clear. She had already given so much of herself to this family, and in return she had received a love she never thought possible. She didn't need to think twice. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, James, I will marry you." Tears welled up in both of their eyes as James slipped the ring onto her finger. The moment felt surreal, like a dream come true. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in this quiet, perfect moment. They embraced, their hearts beating together as one. From that day forward, life continued on the ranch. Clara and James began planning their future together, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family. The kids, of course, were overjoyed at the news of their impending wedding. Lily and Ben had always known Clara was special, but now they would be able to call her Mom in a way that felt even more real. The wedding itself was simple but beautiful. It took place on the ranch, just as Clara had always dreamed, surrounded by the fields they had worked so hard to cultivate, with the sky stretching endlessly above them. Their closest friends and family gathered to witness the union of two people who had come together in the face of grief, who had healed each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of their past. When the ceremony was over, and Clara and James stood hand in hand, looking out over the land they had come to love, they both knew that this was only the beginning of their new life together. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Life was never without its difficulties, but they had each other now, and that, they knew, was enough. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife under the stars with the gentle breeze blowing through the trees, they were no longer just two people who had suffered loss. They were a family, strong, united, and filled with love. And together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that they had found something rare and beautiful in each other, a second chance at happiness.